it's still, even though you get safe and rescheduling, we're still going to need federal legalization for the major credit cards to come in and start participating in this industry. Do you agree with that? Hey everyone, welcome to our latest TDR Cannabis exclusive. Great to have you on. I'm your host, Shad Dales. We all know that rescheduling could happen maybe in 2024. And if it does, there'll be lots of lending that will kick in and change overnight. But until then, more companies need access to capital. And that's why we want to bring in our next guest here today, who's actually one of the best thought leaders and is actually answering a lot of those questions and concerns in the cannabis industry. Let's welcome the CEO of Safe Harbor Financial, which trades on the NASDAQ under the ticker symbol SHFS, Sundie Seefried. Great to have you on the first time of the podcast. And I know our guests and our viewers will like this a lot because you are viewed as one of the true thought leaders in the space. But how are you?
I'm great, and thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
Great to have you on. And how was the trip last week in Vegas? MJ Biz, that treats you well?
That's curious like always. Oh, my goodness.
Where'd you end up staying when you're there?
Someplace I'm not sure I'll ever stay again at the Westgate.
Well, at least you saved some money. We stayed at a couple, we stayed at the Cosmo. Love the location, but oh man, it ain't cheap this time of year, that's for sure. But regardless, all in all, it was good to see a bunch of people. But we wanted to have you on because there's a lot of conversations that we had last week that pertain to rescheduling. But I think before we get into Safe Harbor, I'd like to get to know you a little bit more. As I said off the top, you're viewed. You spoke at MJ Biz. There's a lot of people that look at your expertise. You've got over 35 years experience in banking. Then you decided to found Safe Harbor out of necessity for banking solutions in the cannabis sector. So the company launched back in, is it 2014? Am I correct?
That's when I did my initial homework, got approval, and launched January of 2015, the program.
Wow. So when you talk about how this industry has evolved over the past like 7 or 8 years in cannabis, feels like about 30, but from both a positive and a negative aspect, how have you seen this industry evolve over the last 7 or 8 years?
Well, I have to say there's never been a dull moment in my job. And I always tell people banking has been a really boring career, so to speak, in comparison to until cannabis came along.
I
then
bet.
It got rather exciting because it was such an emerging market. And right from the very beginning, I have to say, when we started in January of 2015, the regulators and I agreed that they would allow me to do this so long as I wrote all the procedures, did all the approvals, and do all the underwriting and onboarding of clients so that I could mitigate the risks. So that's how we progressed starting from the very beginning. So when we talk about knowing the clients and knowing the business, I had to just jump right in. And the fact was, the business was, at that point in time, we're under the radar. They weren't saying, over here, I'm over here, right? It was too new in the industry in 2015. So it was really a difficult task to learn the businesses. But the evolution of the industry has been phenomenal. Always changes. And for the banking side of that, every change the industry went through, we had to go through in changing our procedures, processes, and risk mitigation systems at the same time. So it was always just a race to keep up with the industry.
Never a dull moment, right, Anthony?
No, not at all. So I guess underwriting those processes and you being from building this organization from the ground up, how have you stayed compliant? That's a big question that a lot of people have in the financial services sector as it relates to cannabis. Like, how did you build that compliance engine to allow Safe Harbor to become this financial services leader in the cannabis space?
Well, first, it's important to know how I picked those first 10 candidates, right? 10 accounts. And I went to BioTrack because that's who I knew at that point in time, and said, give me your best unbanked clients.
Okay.
And I said, and understand that if you mess up giving me the bad clients, we're going to screw up the program on our side. So I got those 10 clients from BioTrack. And then what I did was by referral only. And every time I had a client in my office, I said, you got to make the next referral. You have to self-regulate here. I don't know the industry well enough. So your assets are only at risk based upon who you bring into the industry. Okay. But to maintain the compliance, I had to get to know those clients. I had to go on site. And I said, I'm going to give you a really good fee reduction for education this year. And I had to really say right to the clients, if you do everything I ask you to do, right or wrong in terms of what you think, nobody has there are no rules here. I will keep in the business. And I would tell you there are times I wanted to quit, but because I made that promise to them, I couldn't. And they gave me the education, and it took me 3 months to get a handle on the industry, to mitigate the risk, and then to share it with regulators. And that was the most important thing I did,
What was that like?
bring the regulators along with me.
Okay.
Right.
They didn't know anything. They were learning with me. And that's exactly what the regulators said right from the beginning. We're going to learn with you. And they trusted me to implement that program in Colorado.
What year was that?
Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead. No.
January 2015 is when we put our
Wow.
first clients in. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sure the regulators have learned a lot too, but go ahead, Anthony.
Yeah, I was going to say, so speaking with regulators, I mean, how much of your time right now is spent like educating people in Washington, educating regulators on how this industry needs to be shaped from a financial perspective on the backs of something like SAFE, or on the backs of something like Schedule 3, that we're just like hanging on a limb right now as far as them actually getting passed and moving us forward to that next step?
Well, the interesting thing is, when you're in an emerging market and the competition's getting created, they're copying right from the very beginning. I really learned what corporate espionage was all about. I mean, I had people calling and garnering information from me and pretending that they were one of the cannabis companies that I wanted to bring on board. It just is amazing. A year later, the cannabis company would call me, and I said, "We talked last year," and they said, "Oh no, we didn't." So I figured out what was going on pretty quickly. But what happened was I knew I didn't want to be the only one in the risk pool in terms of making the industry, because all eyes would be on partner Colorado credit unions. So
Right.
I had to write that book. I had to put the information out there. I had to get followers in the industry. And they were few and far between, but it started bringing up other experts in the industry behind me, albeit they were copying a lot of what we did. It took the pressure off me. So for 2 years, I was on the road speaking over 100 times, educating financial institutions mostly.
Wow.
And regulators. So not only like the credit union regulators, but FDIC regulators, they wanted to understand so that they could do it right. Now, because there are so many out there who can speak, and of course, I'm sure they're still listening to what I say, but since we went public, my time has been spent more on investors. But even even next month, excuse me.
No, all good. All good. This is interesting, though. That's for sure.
Even next month, I'm going to be working with the attorneys generals.
Okay.
So now I focus on law enforcement. So everything
Wow.
in the industry is about education, right? And you bring different segments along at different times. And now we're really trying to assist them in understanding the difference between a regulated and unregulated market.
Now with I guess the breadth and depth of people that you're speaking to, do you truly feel that they are educated enough to craft legislation at this point in time and push this industry forward? Or do you think that they still have a ways to go as far as like understanding the nuances, the state-by-state regulated markets, and it's going to be a learning process going into the future?
The one thing the industry has done correctly, I think, in the last couple of years is organize.
Okay.
What's
And
that mean?
because of their organization, like
Okay.
when some of those associations go to DC, they will bring bankers along with them, like me, to do the lobbying with them. So they're not trying to speak for us; they're trying to bring us all together and say,
Gotcha.
"This is how we're working together."
So
And
what are those bankers saying in those meetings?
that there is a way to bank this.
Okay.
The funny thing is when I went out, it wasn't this year, I missed this year, but last year when I went out, we really focused on the senators and mostly, obviously, the Republican senators. And we had a few Democrats as well. And I was in that room and they were like, it was about social equity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I swear everything was about social equity.
Yep.
You won't even make a mortgage to people of color. And here we are, credit union background. I'm like, that's all we do is serve the underbanked and the underserved. And there was another credit union professional in the room with me with the industry. So there was a lot that we had to say. You're getting bad information out there.
Mm-hmm.
Not only do credit unions reach that market, but there are bank regulations to make them. And oh, by the way, why are you holding banking hostage for an injustice justice that's been going on for decades and centuries, right?
Yeah.
So it just was a strange thing that the whole cannabis industry was held up because of something that's been going on for so long. And how can cannabis correct one inequity of an entire society?
Yep. You live and you learn, right?
Yeah.
Um, so Anthony's brought up some good points, and I know some of the conversations we had last week in Vegas. The big hot topic was rescheduling. If and when that's going to happen. Let's say it happens at some point in 2024. From what you guys are doing right now, from a lending aspect, like how do you see like the domino effect of the industry changing like overnight once indeed the DEA does that make an announcement, if they make that announcement? What are some of the things I think investors might notice? Because let's face it, a lot of these companies need capital right now, right?
Well, we lend like a financial institution would lend because we work with banks and credit unions, right? We sit on their balance sheet, which means we can't put something on their balance sheet that scares them. So we're very conservative, like a bank would be conservative. Cannabis has great opportunity. The minute, this 280E is taken away,
Yeah.
it's going to increase their cash flow. So the thing we look at, cash flow, can you service the debt?
Yeah.
We're not, and the industry is used to going and finding investment money. And that's a lot of projections. That's a lot of, we're going to do this, but we're saying we need cash flow. As a financial institution underwriter and facilitator, we need to know you can service this debt with cash flow, with income. So for us, I think the biggest thing is going to be that more people will have more income, which will qualify them. But what we find in the industry is they're not quite prepared with all those financial statements, with all that savviness necessary to get a bank loan versus investment income.
Mm-hmm.
And in the past, there may have been some easier investment income, and now we know capital is pretty dry. So I find that the banks that talk to us and want to work with us at this point in time want a piece of that lending environment. They
Right.
don't know the industry well enough. They don't know the underwriting and the risks well enough. So Safe Harbor becomes a really good tool to work with to facilitate the loans and to also do the underwriting and monitor the account and the money, because banks want to know the money coming in for payments is good legal money. And how do you do that unless you also look at the deposits?
It's the same conversations we have with Rob Seacrest from Polaris. Like, if we get rescheduling or safe banking to pass, these traditional charter banks are going to need help and direction. And I think a lot of people, some of the investors that we try to educate, is like they're not speaking to their own book. It's just the reality. If you're a charter bank that don't really understand the industry or followed it, we got to make sure this is done and done right. And I would think that's where it's actually going to be even more viable for companies like yourself to work with banks, would it not?
Oh yes. Well, I think there's two sides of that. The side we've just talked about, which is the lending opportunity. But let's face it, investors are going to get much more interested in the industry when it becomes a Schedule 3 and 280E is removed, which means
Yeah.
the investment money will flow in, which equals deposits, which banks are really looking for at this point in time. They want the deposits. Now, to get the deposits, they need to understand the industry too, which is who we are. So, we like to talk to people like Rob and Polaris because while they do the lending side, we can partner with them in order to actually monitor the depository side. So the banks like the deposits that are going to come in from the investment market, and of course the lending, which will give them the long-term relationship, and that's really what every financial institution
Absolutely.
drives toward.
Yeah.
So speaking about Schedule 3 and safer, I mean, we talk about it all the time. We've beaten it like a dead horse probably over the past like 6 months. What
That's
in your
pretty
opinion? What in your opinion is a common misconception or like the biggest misconception as per what they're going to bring or change in the cannabis sector if implemented in their form right now?
And I bet since you had dinner with Tyler last week, you're going to hear the exact same thing out of my mouth you heard from Tyler, is that it's not going to change banking substantially. It's not the end all for the industry. I think it's the beginning of a lot of legislation that needs to be passed.
Yes.
What this does, it's a banking regulation. It protects the bankers from, any prosecution. it also, puts in play the fact that we can legally use the Federal Reserve, because it's still a don't ask, don't tell in the Federal Reserve. They don't want to know you're processing cannabis through them
Yeah.
because they're a federal entity, right? And the third thing I think of is, and I've had this question 100,000 times in the last 10 years, is, are my funds insured federally? We've never had that tested, but according to SAFER, the funds will be insured and they won't eliminate cannabis funds from that protection, which I think is a very big deal for the industry.
That's huge. That's huge deal, right?
Yeah.
But it's just the growth of the industry that we've seen over the last 5 years. But one can only fathom when that day will come. But do you feel, rescheduling will happen and SAFE will pass at some point before the next election? Like, what are your thoughts on it all?
I was probably a real Debbie Downer at the beginning. But, in the Benzinga conference, I got the chance to sit down with Ed Perlmutter, and I had worked from him. One of my very first legislative stops in January 2015 was Ed Perlmutter's office.
Okay.
And he stood right there with his team and said he would support us. And he did. How many years did he try to support, SAFER? So we had a good long talk, and I said, I don't know, 7 times up, 7 times down, and we're really going to see something. And he and I had a good conversation. And I think that after that conversation, I thought, yes, there's good momentum. And then you put on top of that the election year forthcoming.
Yeah.
At some point in time, the Republicans are going to have to stand back, and they got it through the Senate, let's say, but now we're going to have to say who wants the votes most. And this is an industry that can't be denied at this point in time, especially the youthfulness of it.
Yeah. And one thing I actually learned from Tyler last week, and I would curious to get your opinion on it as well. It's still, even though you get SAFE and rescheduling, we're still going to need federal legalization for the major credit cards to come in and start participating in this industry. Do you agree with that?
I think, not to contradict Tyler, but I think Tyler probably, if there's a probability, he might be probably more right than I am on this. What I'm hoping at our junction in terms of where we are with, even the rescheduling, is that one of the major credit cards will want to get their feet wet before the others.
Okay.
And that they will take a look at a proven program like Safe Harbor and say, we're going to trust Safe Harbor to validate those funds the way they have been doing for 10 years. And they're going to help protect us from illicit money running through the rails, which is what they're concerned about.
Okay.
So we may have a first in market opportunity here. And that's what I would be hoping from.
Are you having those conversations now? Have you had, discussions with major credit cards? Like, what's their take on it all, if you have had?
Yes. I think Tyler is consistently and constantly in touch with these major credit cards to make sure that we have that front running position at some point in time and to stay abreast of anything that's going on in the industry. It's just that they don't want to touch it now. And I think their take on it at this point in time has been put out in writing. And that is that they're sending letters to anybody who's processing cannabis funds through any type of credit card or Visa card or MasterCard or anything. And they're saying, stop. And they're going to the processors and doing the same thing. So there's a lot of threat out there and a lot of work going on to find out who's breaking the rules, which probably won't be good for those people breaking the rules, when the opportunity does come around.
From a lending perspective, I mean, I guess you're seeing a lot of diversity as per the companies that you're lending towards. Are you seeing any trends? Like, are they primarily focusing on like CapEx? Are they primarily focusing on working capital? Or is it kind of just, it hasn't really changed and the industry is just growing at the same rate and I guess necessity for capital that you've seen since Safe Harbor started?
Well, it really boils down to our focus. And our focus is to build, obviously, the long-term relationship. And we like to start with real estate, senior secured real estate loans.
Yeah.
Now, this is the great thing. There is a lot of opportunity out there. We're finding the ability not only to find real estate where they've had to pay cash and they want cash out to grow their business, which is good for the business. We're finding real estate loans that are made at 18 and 20% and bringing it down to 10 or 11%, which is, again, freeing up cash for the business. Now, once we get that real estate loan on, and of course, we get the depository relationship, we're really looking at the total relationship.
Yep.
And what we want to do next then is say, we're now giving out lines of credit to the clients we know. And
Okay.
that's a big deal too, because people run short here and there, and cash
Yeah.
currying around the country. Sometimes it takes time to get the money to the bank and into the system. So lines of credit, and then you'll see us probably go toward equipment loans. We do include some of this when we're making loans as cross collateralization, but our
Mhm.
true focus is on the real estate at this point in time.
Do you think, all in all, of everything you just explained, like in due time, do chartered banks become the biggest lenders in this space? Or do you think that you're so far ahead with the expertise that you have, they will continue to lean on your direction for a sustained period of time?
Well, I think it's a combination. So of both. So right now since we went public, we've been very fortunate to talk to the large banks versus the small community credit unions that we were
Yeah.
dealing with.
Yeah.
So now we're getting bigger balance sheets, which allows $1 billion in growth for our company. And that's big for us. That's a lot of money and a lot of growth,
No
but it's
kidding.
not just one bank. So we're very selective about the banks that we bring to the table. One, they seem to know how to work with a fintech model, how to utilize the balance sheet, how to get the core system talking to our software so that we have interaction there to allow us to control the relationship. So that's one factor. But then the second thing is they definitely want that lending money, but they don't know the industry again. So we are their fastest route to get into the lending. Now, does that mean they won't do it on their own in the end? They may, but then we become a pretty strong underwriter still as an opportunity for us to expand our business and just do underwriting. If you if you take just the lending
As
side,
we wait
though,
for you
you're
to make
missing
fruit.
the full opportunity of the depository side. So the banks want the depository side, but they don't want to deal with the compliance on deposits. That's where we really come in on the strong suit in terms of understanding how to protect the financial institution and the Bank Secrecy Act obligations to which they're tied. If you take, and I'm rambling here, so you stop me on your
No,
own
all
line.
good.
If you take a big national bank who has 1,000 branches across the country,
Yep.
they cannot perform bank secrecy obligations in those 1,000 branches. And what are those 1,000 branches trying to do? They're trying to build depository relationships. How do you take cannabis cash in 1,000 branches and make sure that it's all legal from a central location? It's impossible. So the fintech model that we built is the perfect solution. Obviously, I don't know. I think we probably, if we were, and the banks have said this, and the large banks have said, you go ahead and build this model because we're just going to, buy into the market. We're not necessarily going to reinvent the wheel.
Yep. Hey everyone, so what'd you think of the video? Leave your comments below and let us know your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. As usual, subscribe to our channel by clicking on the link here. If you want to see more videos like this, then click on the link here and click on that bell for all notifications. Because most importantly, we want to know your feedback because we wouldn't be here without you. Thanks for watching, everyone.